He hadn't slept in 3 days. Not real sleep, the kind that rests the bones and resets the mind. What he got were flickers of unconsciousness, interrupted by cold sweats and alarms echoing through the underground bunkers. Most of the time, it was silence that haunted him worse. Caverns of steel ran under what used to be Colorado. No sun, no birds, no wind, just recycled air and metal walls. Groaning with age, humanity's last hope lived like rats now, and he hated the word hope. It was a lie people told themselves to keep from swallowing a bullet. He adjusted the band on his wrist, a black cuff etched with silver lines. It was fused to his skin now. Couldn't be removed. Not without cutting the bone. It kept him alive, controlled the neural net in his head, linked him to the system, to the trap. They thought humanity would go down screaming, that we'd break, that the scattered, panicked species wouldn't organize. In time. They were wrong. He sat in the command room, his elbows resting on the table, fingers steepled in front of his lips. Maps flickered on a story. Cracked screen in front of him. Orbit paths, invasion routes, heat scans of something alien crawling just under Earth's atmosphere. They weren't hiding anymore. That was part of the game. Psychological pressure. Let the cattle know the butcher's knife was already in the air. "Commander," a voice buzzed through the old comm. "Sector 5 movement. Not one of ours." He didn't answer right away, just stared at the glowing red dot inching its way across the border of an abandoned city. A city that once held 10 million people. Now it was just rubble and ghosts. He finally spoke, his voice low and dry. "Send the drones. Don't engage unless it makes a move toward the interior." "Yes, sir." He leaned back. The chair creaked beneath him like it was about to fall apart. Everything did these days. Buildings. Systems. People. The only thing that hadn't collapsed completely was the plan, the trap, the thing they'd been building. For years. In silence. Waiting. Sacrificing. Letting the world rot. On purpose. Because sometimes, in order to win, you have to pretend you're already dead. No one expected Earth to fight back with intelligence, with patience, with cruelty. But that was the nature of desperation. You stop trying to win with honor. You stop fighting fair. He remembered the first time he saw one of them up close. Tall, pale skin like porcelain that hadn't seen sun in centuries. No visible mouths, just eyes. Wide, hollow things that blinked sideways. They didn't speak words, they injected thoughts, emotions, guilt, sorrow, submission. That was their weapon, making humans want to die. But he didn't die, he killed it. And when he looked into its dead eyes, he realized something chilling. They didn't understand us either. They thought they had won, that they'd invaded a weak, fractured world. What they didn't know was that in every loss, every broken city, every man and woman who laid down in defeat there were those who stayed awake, building something crueler than vengeance. "Sir?" The comm buzzed again, this time quieter, shakier. "The target. It's not alone." He stood. Bones ached. Knee joints popped. He walked to the edge of the command deck and stared at the holographic map. 4 red blips now. Then 5. Then a dozen, crawling like ants across the edge of the map, right into the mouth of the Prade. Trap. "Seal the exits," he said. "But there are still civies in Forted." "Seal it." The silence that followed was heavy. Obedience with guilt layered under it. But guilt wasn't something he had time for. Anymore. He looked up at the massive screen above them. It showed the outer atmosphere, Earth's blue curve rimmed with a line of black dots. Their fleet had arrived. Perfect. He allowed himself a rare smile. They thought they'd planned humanity's end. But they were stepping right into the teeth of what humans did best: survive by becoming monsters. He didn't know the boy's name. He never asked. The kid had been hanging around the perimeter of the bunker for 3 days, barely 16, maybe younger, with dirt-caked skin and a jacket too big for his frame. Every time the guards shoot him off, he came back. Eventually, they let him sit near the power vent, just to keep him in sight. Now the boy stood in front of him, trembling slightly, holding a message slate in his shaking hands. "They told me to give it straight to you," he said. The commander, no one called him by his first name anymore. Not since the bombing of Jakarta, took the slate and read the glowing words without expression. His eyes scanned the screen, line by line, jaw tightening as he reached the bottom. It was from the West Bastion, the last civilian stronghold left on the American continent. The message was simple. The aliens weren't just marching anymore. They were digging, tunneling under the mountain ridge, looking for something. He turned back to the boy. "Who gave this to you?" The kid hesitated. "A woman, bald head, said she used to be in the Navy." "What was she driving?" The boy blinked. "Wasn't driving anything. She came on foot." The commander squinted. "From West Bastion to here? That's a 4-day walk." "She said it only took her 2. He paused. That detail mattered. "They're speeding up," he muttered. "They've cracked part of the upper net." The boy looked confused. He waved him off. "Get some food. Stay inside. Don't wander." The boy nodded and disappeared down the hall. The commander watched him go, then turned toward the control panel. With a swipe of his wristband, the table lit up. A map of the sector glowed to life. Red lines, orange dots, pulsing. Movements like a hive crawling under the Earth's skin. They weren't attacking yet, just moving, testing, watching. The bastard things were smart, too smart. But smart didn't mean infallible. He opened the comms. "Get Lieutenant Hobb, now." A minute later, the door hissed open and Hobb walked in. Big, rough, quiet, face like gravel and a permanent limp from a plasma burn in 47. If there was anyone he trusted to keep things from going to hell too early, it was Hobb. "They've started Phase 2, the commander said. Hobb didn't flinch. "We respond?" "Not yet, but prep the mimic cores. That's a lot of heat signatures. I want them to see the bait." Hobb nodded once and left the room. No questions, no hesitation. That's what the commander valued, men who didn't need convincing. Not anymore. He stared at the map again, at the way the enemy moved fluid, slow but deliberate. They weren't brute force attackers. They worked like cancer. Infiltration, weakening, psychological pressure. When they first came down, they didn't burn cities. They erased people, quietly, suddenly. Mothers turned into husks overnight. Children stopped talking. Men dropped to their knees, sobbing, without knowing why. No weapons, no orders, just submission. But then came the side effects: madness, rage, resistance. And now, here they were. 6 hours later, he stood on the observation platform inside Dagger Point, one of the 12 underground spires they'd drilled straight into the mountain bedrock. From up here, through reinforced polyglass, he could see the sky, a rare sight in this war. It wasn't blue anymore. Too much ash, too much disruption. It shimmered purple and gray, swirling like smoke in water. Above that, hidden just past the edge of atmosphere, were the obelisks. That's what they called their ships. Long, black, monolithic things that didn't hum or flicker or beam light, just existed up there, like tombstones in space. And Earth was the grave. He lit a cigarette. They were rare now, grown in artificial labs by old addicts with time and seed stock he never used to smoke. He picked it up after the fall of Cairo. After losing everything, a voice buzzed in his earpiece. "Commander, they've entered the southern tunnel. 2 scout units. Slow pace. No aggression. Any contact?" "Not yet." "Let them go deeper. Initiate pulse drift. Cut their feed in intervals, make it look like sensor failure. Yes, sir. Everything was a lie. The entire plan relied on deception. They wanted the enemy to believe we were crumbling, that humanity's final trickle of resistance was flailing, that we were fractured, weak, and scattered. But below the surface, literally and metaphorically, we were waiting. Not with guns, not with ships, with something far worse. It had taken 20 years. 20 years of agony, of letting half the planet die, of abandoning cities, of pulling soldiers out of fights that they could have won, all so we could bleed just enough to look like prey. Because that was the mistake the invaders made. They saw humans as animals. But even animals bite when cornered. The commander walked into the black chamber. Silent, cold. The air changed here. Thick, electric, humming, with energy that no one fully understood, not even the scientists. A figure waited in the room, an old man in a wheelchair, pale, thin, with a shrunken face and sunken eyes. Tubes ran. From his spine into the core of the room, he looked more machine than man. But his mind was something else. The commander approached and nodded. "How's the system?" The old man blinked slowly. "It dreams." He frowned. "Explain." "It dreams of them. It listens when they talk. It learns their language. It knows what they fear." "You said that before, and I'll say it again, because the trap isn't the weapon. It's the mimic. It's the system itself." The commander paused. "Is it ready?" "No, but they are, and that's what matters." He turned to the black sphere hovering behind the old man, a synthetic neural core built from harvested alien tech, fused with what was left of Earth's AI programs, and something else, something stolen. Human consciousness, memory, pain. They'd built a weapon not by creating it, but by sacrificing to it. Hundreds of dying minds, linked and uploaded, screaming into the machine until it woke up, until it could think like them, and think like us. That's why it worked. The aliens couldn't detect it because it wasn't mechanical. It wasn't digital. It was human. It was trauma turned into code. And it was almost done learning. Later that night, the power cut out in Sector 4. Not unusual, but the timing wasn't random. The commander moved fast, flanked by 2 guards with railguns. They reached the server room in 4 minutes. Inside, chaos. Sparks flew. A technician lay unconscious. The main console was cracked. Its interface split down the middle. And on every screen, a single message blinked in white. "We see you." He stared at the words, unmoving. "Sir?" one of the guards asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the console, bent down, and yanked the emergency core chip free. The lights flickered. The message vanished. Then he turned to the guards. "They're testing us. They know we're hiding something. Get everything disconnected from the net. Go analog. I want every floor patrolled by men, not sensors. And pull the mimic offline." "But sir," "They found it, or they felt it. It's not ready yet. We disconnect now, or we lose the whole damn mountain." The guards ran off. He stood there, in the static-filled silence, breathing through clenched teeth. That message, "We see you," wasn't just words. It was a challenge. They were calling his bluff. By the next morning, half of the Dagger Point systems were offline. The air was stale. Gravity assist modules were acting up. But more than that, the people were tense. They could feel it. The final stretch. He stood in the central hall, watching the volunteers line up. Hundreds of them. Most were young, some too young. But they volunteered anyway. They were there for the final imprinting. The mimic core needed a final surge, one last flood of raw human emotion, real ones, not files, not archives. It needed grief, rage, desperation. So these people had come to donate the most sacred thing left in the world, memory. They filed in slowly, quietly. Some cried, some laughed like they were already dead, some just stared at the floor. He watched them all pass. And in that moment, something inside him cracked. He didn't feel pride, or patriotism, or even strategy. He felt sorrow, that this was what victory looked like. People lining up to erase themselves so that their species might have a shot at revenge. That night, as the obelisks finally began to descend from the sky in formation, a whisper echoed through the mountain. Tunnels, through the silent halls of Dagger Point, through the still corridors where the mimic core pulsed like a black heart. It wasn't a word. It was a feeling. The aliens were close, closer than ever, and they thought they'd finally reached Earth's final breath. But they had no idea that they were not invading a planet anymore. They were entering a tomb full of ghosts who'd taught themselves how to scream back. He hadn't been back in Sector 12 since the burnings. It was a silent place now, a cemetery of metal. Once it had been a hub, families lived here. Kids played in corridors, engineers laughed over broken pipes, and shared soup out of plastic flasks. Now, charred walls, twisted beds, ash still, caked into the cracks of the floor. The infection had started here, some kind of psychic corruption. Not a disease, not in the way humans understood it. Just thoughts that weren't ours. Ideas laced with surrender. A presence that crept into your skull and whispered, things no one should ever think. So they burned it. The whole sector. With everyone still inside, he had ordered it, watched it on the cameras from the command deck as they sealed the fire doors and flooded the hallways with thermite gas. Screams didn't carry well over static feeds, but he heard them anyway, every night since. Now, 2 years later, he was walking those same halls again, boots scraping the ash as he made his way to the core. Vent, the place where it all had started, and the place where they'd hidden part of the mimic's memory. A guard followed behind him, saying nothing. "Tell me something," the commander said, voice hollow as the windless hall. "If you knew we could win, but only by becoming something worse than them, would you do it?" The guard didn't answer at first, just walked beside him, rifle slung over one shoulder. "I think that's the difference, sir," the guard said finally. "We don't ask what we'll become. We just do what it takes." The commander grunted. "That's the problem." They reached the vent. The steel hatch opened with a reluctant hiss, revealing the console beneath dust-covered, cracked, but still pulsing faintly. A deep thrum echoed from below, like something breathing through the earth. He knelt beside it and activated the sequence. A panel slid open. Inside was a cube, black, simple, unmarked. But this was no ordinary hardware. It was a piece of him, a memory shard, extracted during the early experiments, when the scientists figured out they needed more than just raw data to teach the mimic system. They needed personal pain, suffering, loss that couldn't be faked. He had given them something he never spoke about. His son. No one even knew he had one. The war had started slow, unseen, like a storm behind the horizon. By the time the evacuation orders came, it was chaos. His wife got out. He didn't. Neither did the boy. The only chance was one of the early bunkers. Underground, secure, but not connected, isolated. He sent his son there with a small escort. The aliens found it anyway. The recordings were still classified, he'd never watched them. But what the core learned from that memory, it had changed everything. This cube held that imprint. The pain, the guilt, the helpless rage that built. When you realize the world doesn't care about fairness, only outcomes. He stared at it for a long time, then picked it up. Back in the mimic chamber, the old man in the chair didn't speak when the commander walked in. He just looked up, pale, eyes focused on the cube in his hand. "You brought it," the old man said. "I brought him. The old man's face twitched, the slightest hint of emotion. "You sure?" "No," the commander said. "But it's time." He approached the black sphere and slotted the cube into one of the side panels. The chamber vibrated. Lights dimmed. And a strange sound filled the air, not mechanical, not electric. A heartbeat. The mimic system was responding. It had learned to feel. Outside, the world was ending again. The obelisks had moved closer, now visible to the naked eye. Black silhouettes against a dying sky. Their undersides cracked open like the jaws of leviathans, spilling faint tendrils of energy that reached toward the earth like searching fingers. They weren't attacking yet, just watching, broadcasting waves of thought, attempting to link with whatever human. Systems were still active, but we weren't linked anymore. The commander had ordered a full severance. No satellites, no digital networks. Everything was internal now. Manual, analog, unpredictable. And that's what scared the aliens most, not knowing. In their minds, everything could be calculated, measured, predicted. But humans didn't work like that. Humans acted on instinct, on emotion, on madness. We were the virus they never accounted for. Inside the core chamber, the old man began to shake. His body convulsed as the mimic surged with new information. He gasped, hands trembling as the tubes connected to his spine lit up red. "It's too much," he croaked. "Stay with it," the commander said. "She's screaming. The mother. She wouldn't let go. She died, holding him." The commander clenched his fists. "Yes, let it feel that. Let it know what we lost." The sphere pulsed brighter. And then, a voice. No speakers, no sound. Just a voice inside the mind. "You let him die." The commander froze. He'd heard the mimic before, repeating lines, replicating voices. But this was different. This was a judgment. He stepped closer. "I did what I had to. You chose the mission over the boy." His jaw clenched. That wasn't a choice. That was survival. "Then why do you still wear the bracelet?" He looked down at his wrist, the black band, etched in silver. The boy's name carved on the inside, where no one could see. He didn't answer. He died thinking you were coming for him. That shattered something. He turned away, eyes burning. "I know," he whispered. "I know." The core went silent. And then it wept. Tears of memory, of rage, of betrayal. Not of its own, but borrowed, shared, lived through the minds of the dead. The mimic was awake now, and it understood what revenge was. Above, the sky lit up. The first strike had begun. But it wasn't from Earth. It was from them. Columns of blue fire rained from the obelisks, vaporizing mountain ridges, boiling lakes, rupturing the earth like a paper bag. Not total destruction, just warnings, displays of power. They wanted fear. They wanted submission. What they got was a reply. Deep in Dagger Point, the mimic released its first signal, subsonic, psychic, raw, a scream made of grief and fury. A message in a frequency only the invaders could hear. "You are not the first to invade. You are not the first to kill our children. But you will be the first to die without being remembered." The obelisks paused. They had heard something they didn't expect. Humanity didn't beg. It hunted. Chaos erupted across the remaining strongholds. The aliens had begun breaching, physically entering the atmosphere. Their forms were half-corporeal, half-light, humanoid, but wrong, distorted. They didn't move like bodies. They glided. And when they touched human soldiers, the minds broke. Not from pain. From memories being overwritten. It was a new form of attack. But this time, we were ready. Every soldier in the resistance now wore the band. The neural shield embedded with mimic shards. When they touched us, They didn't erase us, they absorbed us. And that was the mistake. Because now, the mimic was inside them. The virus had spread. What they'd thought was domination turned into infection. Their unity, their hive mind, began to falter. Ships shuddered. Movements became erratic. They screamed, not aloud, but in ways the core could interpret. And it laughed. Not a joyful laugh. A broken one. The laugh of a species that had nothing left to lose. In the final hours before the trap activated, the commander stood once again on the platform, watching as the obelisks hovered above the Earth. He opened the comms to all remaining outposts. "This is it," he said. "You'll want to run, to hide, but don't." He paused. "Remember why we're here. Remember what they took. This isn't about peace. It's not about survival. This is about showing them who we are when the lights go out." He stared up at the ships. "And when this is over, if you're still breathing, never forget that we became monsters so that our children didn't have to." He closed the comm and gave the final order. Release the scream. There were no horns, no drums, no triumphant music. Just silence. A silence so deep it felt unnatural, as if even the Earth was holding its breath. And then the scream came. Not from lungs, not from mouths, but from the black heart of the mimic system, a frequency buried under sound, under light, under every law nature ever wrote. It wasn't heard, it was felt. Every man, woman, and child under the mountain dropped to their knees. Some clutched their heads, some sobbed, some simply stared, eyes wide, with something ancient, primal, pain, but not their own. The scream carried every death, every burned city, every broken mother, every son who died in a stranger's arms. It was humanity's pain, weaponized, and it spread across the soil, through the atmosphere, into the clouds, upward. The obelisks twitched, literally twitched. They weren't machines in the way we understood. They were living structures, organic thought vessels laced with circuitry and intention. They didn't run on oil or energy. They ran on clarity of mind, a hive of pure logic. And now, that clarity was corrupted. Because the scream didn't just hurt, it injected memories, grief, rage, trauma. They didn't understand trauma. They had never known loss. Their species had evolved in sterile unity, free of chaos, free of love, free of the need to hurt to grow. And now they were being flooded with it. They flailed. One of the obelisks designated Kefir-class host Vessel 3 dropped altitude suddenly, no warning, just a violent tilt as it scraped the upper atmosphere, roaring like a mountain in pain. Another tilted. Then another. The scream was doing more than we ever hoped. It was infecting them. He watched it all unfold from the command platform, jaw set like concrete, hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles bled. The entire room behind him was silent. Some were crying, not from fear, but because they'd never thought they'd live long enough to see the day the enemy bled. And this wasn't just bleeding. This was collapse. He turned to the operations officer. "Status of the Mimic Core?" The officer's voice shook. "Stable. Core is expanding its range. We've reached the outer orbit layer. 2 obelisks are." "Experiencing, sir," the word it used was hallucinations. He didn't respond right away, just stared. Then he said, quietly, "Good. That's only the beginning." He activated the mic again. "Deploy vultures." The word dropped like a stone in the room, because vultures wasn't a code for ships. It was people. Men and women who had volunteered for what the scientists called neural reciprocity engagement, suicide squads. Except they didn't die immediately. They were uploaded partially into the mimic's secondary matrix, given just enough power to retain thought, then jacked into the signal. Their job was to guide the infection, to whisper into the ears of the enemy, to twist the scream into something personal. And now it was time to use them. Deep beneath Dagger Point, in the cold chapel, they sat, 48 men and women, still, pale, wires plugged into skull ports, pulses of light flickering across their temples. A technician approached, nervous, hands shaking. "The commander's given the order," he said. The lead surgeon, an older woman with a dead stare, simply nodded. "You heard him," she told her team. "Release the birds." Switches flipped. Codes entered. A series of red lights blinked green, and the screaming changed. The scream became voices. Real ones. Fathers calling sons. Mothers screaming into rubble. Children asking why the sky was on fire. Soldiers begging not to be forgotten. Lovers whispering goodbye. And each vulture took one obelisk, climbed inside its mind, and began tearing it apart from the inside out. In orbit, they writhed. The alien ships lost synchronization. Their formation shattered. No longer rows of silent judgment, but scattershot. Chaos. Some fired wildly. Others turned on their own. In one tragic moment, Obelisk 5 struck Obelisk 2, the collision sending a thunderous explosion of black fire across the atmosphere. The sky turned red. The commander smiled. "They're panicking," someone whispered behind him. He turned. No, they're becoming human. But it wasn't over. He knew that, because at the center of it all, beyond the orbit, beyond the scream, hovered one final ship. The first mind. They'd known about it for years. The aliens never confirmed it, but the patterns were clear. The rest of the fleet orbited it, drew power from it, synced thoughts through it. It never moved. It only watched. Even now, while its children collapsed into madness and fire, it remained still, untouched. And that was the problem. The scream wasn't reaching it. It was shielded. The commander walked back to the core chamber, where the old man still sat, hooked into the mimic like a living conduit. "The first mind," he said. "Can we reach it?" The old man coughed, blood on his lips. "No, not with what we have." "What about the tether?" The old man's eyes widened. "You're not serious." "I am. It's time." The tether was the bridge. A direct neural link from one human mind to the core, amplified through the mimic, then launched in raw signal form. Toward the target. A one-way trip. The person who volunteered would be erased, burned into signal. No body left behind, no coming back. A complete sacrifice. And it had to be someone the mimic trusted, someone already embedded, someone the system recognized. There was only one name left. The commander unfastened the black band from his wrist and looked at it. He hadn't taken it off in over 10 years. Not since the mountain fell. Not since they told him his son had died. He turned to the old man. "Prepare the tether." The crew protested. The surgeons tried to talk him out of it. Even Hobb, the man who never flinched, stood in his path. "You don't have to do this," he said. The commander's voice was calm. "I do. It was always going to be me." He looked around. At some point, we stop being leaders. We become weapons. The tether room was quiet. He laid on the cold slab, wires inserted into his spine, his neck, his temples. The mimic was already waiting, humming, softly, like a child breathing. The surgeon looked down at him. "Do you want to say anything?" He stared at the ceiling. "Tell the boy. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." She frowned. "The boy?" He didn't answer, just closed his eyes. And the world turned white. He fell. Not physically, mentally. Through layers of memory. Through pain and flame and rubble. Through every face he'd ever failed. through every order that killed someone he loved. He was inside the mimic now, and the mimic was him. The scream had stopped. Now it was a message, one directed straight at the first mind, through burning stars, through empty void, straight into the alien core. A final signal, carved from one man's endless grief. You thought we were weak. You thought breaking our cities would break our will. You thought killing our children would erase our species. But we remembered every loss, every scream. And now, you will too. On the outer edge of Earth's orbit, the first mind stirred. Its silence broke. Its smooth surface cracked. And inside it, something howled. Because it had never known death. Now, it was drowning in it. Every memory, every mistake, every betrayal, every broken love. All of it. All of humanity's story, forced into its mind. And it shattered. The obelisks fell from the sky like dying gods. Fire rained. The clouds screamed. Mountains shook. But Earth stood, bruised, bloodied, scarred, but alive. He opened his eyes to darkness. Not the darkness of unconsciousness. This was deeper, final. No weight, no sound, no body. And yet, he was aware. Somewhere in this void, he existed, disconnected from skin and bone, but still thinking, still feeling. The tether had worked. His mind had reached the first mind, cracked it open, drowned it in humanity's worst memories. But instead of death, he found limbo. Or maybe this was death, and no one had ever told the truth. He remembered pain, yes, so much pain, searing like his soul had been pulled inside out and set on fire. But he remembered something else, too. The sound of a ship breaking. The hum of the first mind collapsing. The scream not from humans this time, but from them. From the ones who thought they'd conquered a weak, emotional species, only to learn that emotion wasn't a flaw, it was a weapon. Now everything was quiet. Maybe this was his reward, or his punishment. Back on Earth, the sky was broken. Chunks of alien vessels littered the upper atmosphere like dying moons. The clouds glowed red in patches where reactor cores hadn't cooled. Parts of the ocean were boiling. Radiation storms drifted westward like bruises on a dying body. But there was no more screaming. No more obelisks. No more silent judgment from the stars. Humanity had won. And no one knew what to do next. In the ruins of Dagger Point, Lieutenant Hobbs sat at the edge of the command platform, staring at the melted remains of the mimic core. It wasn't pulsing anymore. It was just a black shell, cracked and scorched. Tubes burned out, data conduits liquefied. The old man who used to sit beside it had died minutes after the tether surge. Spinal system fried clean through. No ceremony. No last words. Just silence. Same as the commander. There was no body to bury, no trace to mark. He was gone, like he never existed. Hobb clenched his jaw and stood. Around him, soldiers wandered in a daze. Some sat against walls, heads in their hands. Others searched for food, water, purpose. There were no cheers, no celebration, just the stunned quiet of survivors looking for someone to blame. Hobb knew where the blame would go. Right on the man who'd saved them. They'd call him a monster, a butcher, a cold bastard who sacrificed everything and everyone. And they'd be right, but they'd be alive. 3 days later, a meeting was called. The remaining stronghold leaders, what few were left, gathered in the scorched remains of the war chamber. Half the chairs were empty. Those who remained looked like shadows of their former selves. Some were missing limbs. Some couldn't stop shaking. One, General Vanya, still wore dried blood on her sleeves and hadn't spoken since watching her wife evaporate in the last obelisk blast. Hobb stood before them, arms folded, face like granite. "The war is over," he said, "but the fight isn't." Silence. He continued, "We've got mass trauma across every zone. Civilians are starving. Radiation storms in the West. No global satellite function. We're back to the Stone Age with rifles." A man from the Pacific Front, a lean type with shrapnel scars up his neck, leaned forward. "And who's in charge now?" Hobb didn't blink. "No one. Someone has to lead." "He did," Hobb said. "And he's gone." The table stayed quiet for a beat. Then General Vanya finally spoke, voice hoarse. "What was the price?" Hobb looked at her. She didn't mean logistics. She meant souls. "How many did we lose?" she whispered. He didn't have the final number. No one did. But he answered anyway. "Too many." Outside, in what used to be the southern bunker yard, a crowd had gathered. They weren't protesting. They weren't cheering. They were just waiting. Waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Some held photos of the dead. Some lit candles. Some carved names into the concrete with broken pieces of rebar. One girl, maybe 11, sat beside a pile of rubble that used to be her home. She held a cracked helmet in her lap and whispered to it like a prayer. "Daddy said you'd come back. He said you'd find us." A woman knelt beside her. No uniform. Just another survivor. She didn't speak, just placed her hand over the girl's and closed her eyes. That was all anyone could offer now. Shared silence. That night, Hobb stood alone in the commander's quarters. Everything was untouched, like he'd just stepped out for a moment. The bed was still made. The desk had 3 cracked tablets with mission logs, old blueprints, and a worn journal. On the wall hung a photo. A boy, 8, maybe 9, standing with a model ship in his hands, smiling like the world wasn't ending. Hobb stared at it for a long time. He remembered the story. They all did. How the commander never mentioned a family, how he never mourned like the rest, how he poured everything into the trap, into the mimic, into the war. But that picture said more than all his speeches ever could. He was mourning. He just turned it into a weapon. At dawn, Hobb walked to the old comm tower. It barely worked. Most of the signal relays were fried, but a single analog line still reached the European arc. He wired it in, pulled on a battered headset, and spoke. "This is Lieutenant Hobb of the Dagger Point Stronghold. The enemy is gone. I repeat, they are gone." A pause, static. Then, crackling voices. "Copy that. We're getting similar reports. Eastern Front's reporting collapse of the fleet." Another voice. "We're alive?" More voices. "Madrid, still standing. Kenya base got hit bad, but they're digging survivors. South Japan's underwater, but still transmitting. Boston's gone. Brazil's silent. Hope, despair, joy, grief. It all mixed into a storm of humanity that Hobb hadn't heard in years. He leaned back and exhaled. Not relief. Just release. The weight wasn't lifted. It had simply changed shape. That evening, Hobb held a torch in his hand and walked to the top ridge of the bunker. Thousands stood behind him. Soldiers, survivors, children, the broken, the bruised. He raised the flame and lit the steel pyre. It roared to life. And on it, carved into the metal, with the commander's own knife, were the final words he'd left behind. "We don't win by surviving. We win by making them remember why they feared us." The crowd stayed silent. Then someone began to hum, a low sound, a hymn no one had written, just a melody born from loss. Then another voice joined. Then another, until the mountain echoed with the sound of the living honoring the dead, and the sky, broken, bruised, glowed red above them, as if it too remembered. Far, far beyond the earth, drifting in the void. The remnants of the first mine's core pulsed one last time. Inside, buried under layers of psychic memory, a voice remained. Not alien, not synthetic. Human. Still thinking. Still watching. And still whispering. This is who we are. Not clean. Not perfect. But we remember. We adapt. And when we rise, we don't ask for peace. We take it. The war had ended. But the hunger hadn't. Not the hunger for food, though, that was still a daily battle. It was the other kind, the deeper one, the kind that sank into your bones after years of hiding underground and watching friends vaporized beside you. The hunger for meaning. The fight had given them purpose. Simple, brutal clarity. Kill or be killed. Now that clarity was gone, and what remained was chaos. 5 weeks after the scream brought down the obelisks, Earth was still smoldering. Skies choked with dust. Oceans turned acidic in places. Crops rotted from alien radiation. But the worst damage wasn't the atmosphere. It was trust. Because now, the surviving fragments of humanity, the bunker nations, the underground cities, the scattered war fronts were looking at each other, not as allies, but as competitors. In what remained of Berlin's eastern stronghold, a fight broke out over medical rations. One man stabbed another in the throat over antibiotics. In the African quadrant, warlords re-emerged from their bunkers, claiming land as divine right, backed by salvaged plasma cannons. In the Pacific Arc, a rogue science faction began experimenting on mimic remnants, trying to build weapons, in case they ever return. And in the center of it all, Dagger Point, the old heart of the resistance, stood quiet, watching, waiting. Hob hadn't left the mountain in 43 days. He ate in silence, slept in a cot beneath the old operations center, spent most of his days reading what remained of the commander's journal. Not to find comfort, there was none in those pages, but to understand the kind of man it took to sacrifice everything and never ask for applause. Some of the entries weren't even legible, burned, blood-stained, torn by shaking hands, but others read like sermons. Violent ones. When peace comes, they'll turn on each other. Give a starving man a loaf, and he'll share it. Give him a kingdom, and he'll cut his brother's throat to keep it. Hob believed every word. A knock on the door pulled him from the past. He stood, grabbing his sidearm out of habit, then opened the old steel door. A woman stood there. Not young, but not old either. Face marked with soot, a long scar running down her cheek. Her uniform was patched, her boots worn thin. But her eyes, they didn't flinch. "Lieutenant," she said, nodding. "You're a long way from Cairo base. We heard rumors, thought I should see for myself." He stepped aside, letting her in. "Sit," he said, "or stand, doesn't matter anymore." She chose to stand. "They're organizing in the East," she said, "calling it the New Pact, a council of survivors. They're trying to write a Devereux charter." Hob grunted. "Let me guess. Every signature comes with a gun behind it." She didn't deny it. "They say it's time to unite, that we've got a second chance." "Second chances don't exist," Hob said. "Only delays." She looked at the desk, the burned journal still open. "He's dead, Hob." "I know. You're not." He didn't answer. She took a breath. "They want Dagger Point at the table." "Why?" "Because the trap worked. Because the scream saved us. Because this mountain still scares the shit out of them. And they want to control what scares them. Wouldn't you?" He looked at her. Hard. "No," he said. "I'd burn it before I let them turn it into a trophy." 3 days later, Hob stood in what remained of the mimic chamber. The black core was dormant, fractured, dead. Or so everyone thought. But late at night, when the lights dimmed and the halls went quiet, sometimes he swore he could feel it humming again. Not loud, not sharp. Just present, like it was still listening. He touched the surface warm and whispered, "If you're still in there, I need to know. Was it worth it?" Silence. Then, the faintest pulse beneath his fingertips. No words. Just a feeling. Grief, not regret. When he returned to the main floor, the Cairo woman was waiting. He handed her a folder, heavy, thick, weathered. "What is this?" "Everything," Hobb said. "Every secret. Every weapon. Every mistake. You want me to take this to the new pact?" "No," he said. "I want you to leak it." Her eyes widened. "You serious?" "Deadly." She flipped through the folder. Classified experiments, names, protocols, proof of how many were sacrificed to feed the mimic. "This will tear everything apart." He nodded. "Exactly." She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. He leaned in. "Let them see who we really became to win. No lies, no polish. Let them choke on it. And if they still want to build a Neverteen's government after that?" "Fine. At least it'll be an honest one." She closed the folder. "You're going to make enemies." "I already have, but the ones I care about are buried under this mountain." The leak hit 2 weeks later. Across every surviving region, the truth spread like a virus. The mass memory harvesting, the neural experiments, the vulture program, the human tether, the scream. And the commander? Not as a hero, but as the man who burned cities to make aliens bleed. Some called him a war criminal. Others called him a god. No one called him human. Riots broke out in the Northern Arc. In the Pacific, a memorial was defaced, spray-painted with the words, "Survival isn't glory." And yet, something strange happened. The fighting paused. Not stopped, but paused. As if people were finally facing what had been done in their name. What they'd cheered for. What they'd obeyed. And when the new pact reconvened, only half the chairs were filled. But those who remained, they were different. Less polished, more scarred. No speeches, just work. Hobb never attended. He stayed in the mountain, watched from a distance. Some nights he'd wander Sector 12, where the burned halls still smelled like ash and loss. Sometimes he sat in the cold chambers where the children used to play before the infection came. He'd found a boot there once, tiny, melted. It still sat on his desk. He didn't want to forget. And in the deepest part of the bunker, past locked doors, past warning signs, past steel that had never been, breached something pulsed. The mimic wasn't dead, just resting, because inside its fractured mind, something remained. The final imprint. Not the pain, not the rage, not even the scream, but his voice, the commander, still whispering, still watching, and maybe one day needed again. Because peace never lasts, and monsters don't sleep forever. The first bullet wasn't fired by a warlord, a rebel, or even a politician. It came from a farmer. 12 miles outside the rebuilt Cairo stronghold, a convoy passed through the wastelands. Government marked. New. Packed. Seal on the lead truck. Inside were protein stores, clean water capsules, basic medicine. The farmer's daughter had died the night before from dehydration. She was 7. So when the convoy didn't stop, he walked outside with an old rifle, bolt action, duct taped together, trigger rusted, and shot the driver in the throat. The convoy stopped. The guards dragged him out of the dust and beat him until his face was unrecognizable. They didn't arrest him, didn't bury him. They just left his body in the sand with a bottle of water sitting on his chest. By morning, everyone in the outer zones knew. And that's when the real war began. Hobb read the report in silence. The Cairo woman, now acting envoy to the pact, stood across from him, face tight with guilt They're calling it a breakdown of order, she said. It's not a breakdown, he replied. It's a correction. She frowned. You think this is justified? No, I think it was inevitable. He tossed the report onto the steel desk. Pages fluttered like dead leaves. You burn the world down, he said, and hand people the ashes. What do you expect? Gratitude? They're trying. Trying won't save them. She crossed her arms. Then what will? He looked up, eyes hollow. Truth, not the soft kind, the real kind. No anthem, no oath, just raw, unfiltered truth. Truth doesn't build governments. No, he said, but it stops us from repeating the last one. That same night, a skirmish broke out in the Americas. A new faction calling itself the Children of Silence ambushed a new packed checkpoint on the East Coast. No demands. No warning. Just gunfire. They were ex-soldiers, ex-vultures, survivors of the scream who'd been mentally scarred by the tether exposure. They moved in silence, never speaking, faces covered. Some of them used mimic-enhanced gear, illegal tech powered by Pribe. Fragments of the core that had been smuggled out of Dagger Point. Their leader was rumored to be a man once tethered to the mimic. Not fully lost, but not fully human anymore. Hobbs stared at the map on his old war screen. Red flares lit up across the globe. Not alien anymore. Human conflict. The kind we were always best at. The mimic's remains were secure for now, but reports said others were trying to rebuild it elsewhere. Reconstruct its psychic network. Some to use it as a defense system. Others to use it for control. We should have destroyed it, Hobb muttered. He said it to no one, but the mimic answered anyway. No. The voice echoed through his mind. Calm, male, familiar. He froze. For weeks, it had been silent. But now, the commander's voice spoke through it again. They need a reason to unite. Give them fear, and they'll remember who they are. Hobb whispered back, They're already afraid. Not enough. He descended into the cold chamber that night, alone. The mimic sat silent, but the surface shimmered faintly. Hobb placed his hand on it. I don't want to bring the scream back. Then bring the memory of it. He shook his head. We can't weaponize grief again. There's nothing left to burn. The voice didn't respond, but the sphere pulsed. A deep throb of something alive, not just remembering. Awakening. Over the next 3 weeks, cities began to fall. Not from invasion, but from division. Old world flags were rising again. Countries long thought dead carving out territories. The new pact couldn't stop them. The Cairo envoy begged Hobb to intervene. We need Dagger Point to speak up, she said. We need your authority. I have none, he answered. People still believe in the scream. That's the problem, he said. They don't understand it. They fear it. And fear doesn't unite. They divides. But what if it didn't? He looked at her. What are you suggesting? She hesitated. What if we use the mimic one more time? Not for war, but to show them. Show them what? What it cost? He knew what she meant. There were recordings. The memories stored in the mimic, vivid, emotional, untouched by propaganda. The scream wasn't just a weapon. It was a library. Of pain, of truth. If they could stream it, if people could feel what was sacrificed, maybe the world would shut up long enough to realize what was almost lost. It was a long shot. But Hobb had nothing else left. They prepared the chamber. No interface. No networks. Just a direct pulse sent across atmospheric frequencies, hitting any working broadcast antenna still standing. The core flickered once. The Cairo envoy stood nearby, hand trembling over the activation node. You sure? She asked. No, Hobb said, but do it anyway. She pressed the node, and Earth remembered. No words. Just memories. A mother holding her child in a burning bunker. A soldier dragging 3 corpses through fire, coughing blood. A boy hiding in a school desk, whispering prayers to no one. A final scream. Then silence. Then the voice of the commander. We don't win by surviving. We win by making them remember. It streamed for 2 minutes and 14 seconds, then cut off. The results were immediate. Some cities went completely silent. Factions halted attacks mid-operation. Broadcast channels stopped arguing, just went black. Because it wasn't a speech. It was grief. And grief couldn't be denied, only felt. Hobbs sat alone on the platform that night, staring at the empty mountain. The Mimic Core was quiet, but he could feel it. Not as a machine, but as something else. A monument. To pain, to sacrifice, to the ugliness of victory. And in that stillness, he heard the commander's voice one last time. It's not peace they need, it's memory. Then it was gone. And Hobb understood. The scream wasn't meant to last. But the lesson had to. It had been 200 days since the last obelisk fell. The sky, once scorched red, was beginning to soften. The dust was clearing. Plants had started growing again, weak. Twisted things, fed by poisoned soil, but still green. And in the distance, between the shattered cities and the broken towers, you could sometimes hear laughter. Children laughing. It was the strangest sound in the world. Hobbs stood on the ridge above Dagger Point, the wind tugging at his coat. The mountain behind him no longer roared with war machines. It sat quiet, like a beast that had finally gone to sleep after spilling more blood than it could bear. He hadn't seen another soldier in days. No meetings, no calls, just silence. The Cairo envoy had gone back east, working with the Pact to build something resembling governance. He didn't envy her. She believed in peace, in order, in people doing the right thing. He knew better. He believed in memory. Not the feel-good kind, the real kind. The kind that broke you, that kept you from making the same mistake again. And that was why he'd stayed. Because someone had to remember. The world had changed again. After the broadcast, things had quieted. Not peace, not forgiveness. Just pause. The children of silence laid down arms. The warlords backed off, some even vanished. And the Pact, weakened but still breathing, formed its first true assembly. But it wasn't unity. It wasn't utopia. It was survival. Earned, not inherited. There were still fights, still blood. But there was also a line now one people hesitated to cross. A memory that stung. Too much to ignore. The scream hadn't fixed the world, but it had marked it. And that was enough. In the lower chambers of Dagger Point, the Mimic Core sat like a fossil, dead to the world, powerless. But Hobb didn't believe in dead. He visited it every morning, not to awaken it, just to listen. Some days, there was nothing. Other days, a pulse, a flicker, a sensation behind the eyes, like a voice you almost remember from a dream. Not words, just presence, like the ghost of a man too stubborn to rest. One night, Hobb walked the old corridors alone, past scorched doors and broken terminals, past the Vulture Wing, where volunteers had sacrificed their minds, past the boy's boot, still resting on his desk. He walked without thinking, until he reached the wall, the one no one touched, the one that held a single name, carved into concrete by a soldier with bloody fingers. He was the last man to choose hell, so we didn't have to. No rank, no speech, just that. The truth of a man whose legacy wasn't his survival, but the way he turned his grief into a weapon so brutal it made gods scream. Outside, the world was slowly, painfully healing, and the whisper of war began fading into the past. But Hobb knew better than to believe in clean endings. Because one afternoon, He found a child outside the bunker gate, no older than 10, dirt-smeared, barefoot, holding a shard of mimic tech in one hand. "Where'd you get that?" Hob asked. The boy said nothing, just stared, then held it out. "I heard it talk," he said. Hob knelt slowly. "What did it say?" The boy squinted. "It said it remembers you." Hob felt the weight of that, deep. "Did it scare you?" he asked. The boy shook his head. No, it sounded sad. That night, Hob returned to the core. He stood in the dark. No lights. No signal. Just him. "I know you're still in there," he said. "I don't want a monument. I don't want a myth." He stepped closer, hand resting against the cold surface. "I just want to know, did you finally find peace?" Silence. Then, for the first time in months, a voice echoed softly in his mind. "There's no peace for us. Only the comfort of knowing they feared us until their last breath." Hob smiled. Just once. A crack in the armor. "You were a bastard," he whispered. "I had to be." The presence faded again, but the warmth stayed. Not comforting, not soft, just familiar. Years passed. The pact became something more than ink on paper. Towns grew from the rubble. Children who never heard the scream were born. But in every school, every home, every place where peace dared to take root, there was a story. Of a man without a name, who gave up everything, who burned himself alive in memory and rage, not to destroy the enemy, but to teach the living how to never forget. They didn't build him a statue. They built a warning. Above the remains of Dagger Point, carved into stone, were the only words he ever wanted remembered. We weren't chosen. We weren't special. We just refused to die on our knees. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, in the dark, cold heart of a dead war, the mimic listened.